Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
It's great to be back.
Today we're going to be talking about something that's maybe a little bit different than our usual topics.
Definitely a bit of a departure.
Yeah, and I was doing some research for this deep dive, and it just kind of struck me that there's not that much out there in the psychology world about organizational responsibility.
Yeah, that's true.
Like when I was searching in the psychology research databases, there was hardly anything.
Right.
But then I went to like the business databases, it was like a whole different story.
Yeah, tons of stuff.
So that really got me thinking, like, why is there this kind of disconnect?
It is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to try to figure out today.
Looking forward to it.
And to help us with this deep dive, we're going to be taking a look at some excerpts from a chapter by Herman Aquinas. And that's Aquinas rhymes with beer in the book Industrial and Organizational Psychology, Linking Theory with Practice.
Oh, that's a great source.
Yeah, I thought so
Yeah.
too. So let's jump right in. What exactly is organizational responsibility? Because I feel like that could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah, it's definitely a broad term, but Aquinas defines it as context-specific organizational actions and policies that take into account stakeholders' expectations and the triple bottom line of economic, social, and environmental performance.
Okay, hold on. Triple bottom line. What is that?
So basically, it means that organizations have to think about their impact beyond just profits, the financial bottom line.
Okay.
They also need to consider their social and environmental performance.
So it's not just about making money, it's about people and the planet too.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
But how do you actually balance all of that? I mean,
Right.
take like a mining company, for example.
Yeah.
Can they really make a ton of money and also, protect the environment and listen to the concerns of the people who live nearby?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is.
It can be really tough to achieve all three of those things at the same time.
I can imagine. And what about like a clothing company? Trying to keep costs low, but also making sure that the workers in their factories are treated fairly and paid a living wage.
It's definitely a balancing act, and it kind of raises the whole question of, what does success even look like in this context? If profit isn't the only measure, then what is?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and it really gets to the heart of the debate about shareholder value versus a broader stakeholder perspective.
Yeah, because for a long time, businesses have been all about maximizing profits for their shareholders.
Right.
But this idea of organizational responsibility is pushing them to think about a wider range of stakeholders, like their employees,
Yeah.
their suppliers, the communities they operate in, even future generations.
It's a much bigger picture.
It is, and it's a lot harder to ignore these days,
Right.
too.
Yeah.
We think about how easy it is to find information about companies now, their environmental practices, their labor policies. It's all out there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The internet and globalization have really brought a wave of transparency and accountability to the business world.
So there's definitely a lot more pressure on companies to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But does it actually make a difference to their bottom line, or is it just good PR?
Well, that's what we're going to dig into next.
Okay, let's do it.
Aquinas actually presents some pretty interesting evidence suggesting that organizational responsibility isn't just ethical. It can actually be good for business.
Really?
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
So you're saying there's actually data out there that shows that companies can actually do well by doing good.
Yeah, there's a growing body of research that suggests that's the case.
I mean, it sounds good in theory, but I'm curious to see what the evidence actually says.
Well, Aquinas cites a number of studies in his chapter. For example, there are surveys that show that consumers and employees are actually taking social responsibility into account when they're making decisions.
Okay, so like people are actually choosing brands or even jobs based on a company's social responsibility track record.
Exactly. It's becoming a bigger factor in people's decision making.
So there's definitely a demand for it. But do companies actually see a return on their investment when they prioritize these things?
That's the key question, right?
Right.
And the research suggests that they do. Aquinas highlights studies, including a meta-analysis that found a positive correlation between a company's social and environmental performance and their financial performance.
Wow, so it's not just a correlation, it's like actually
So
positive.
it's evidence for a causal link as well.
That's pretty amazing. But how does that actually work? I mean, what are the mechanisms that are driving this?
Oh, there are a few ways it can play out. For one thing, responsible practices can open up access to new markets.
Oh, okay. So like consumers who are specifically looking for eco-friendly products or ethically sourced goods.
Exactly. They're willing to pay a premium for those kinds of things.
That makes sense. And I guess on the flip side, being responsible can also help companies save money.
Right.
Like if they invest in energy efficiency, they'll have lower utility bills.
Yeah, and things like strong safety protocols can reduce workplace accidents and insurance premiums.
So it's like a win-win situation.
Yeah.
You're doing good for the world, and you're also potentially boosting your bottom line.
That's the idea, but how do organizations actually go about becoming more responsible? Is there like a step-by-step guide they can follow?
Yeah, because it sounds pretty complicated.
Well, Iguinis actually outlines a framework for that. He calls it strategic responsibility management, and it involves 6 key steps.
6 steps. Okay, let's hear them.
All right, so step 1 is all about leadership commitment.
Okay, so the people at the top have to be on board.
Exactly. It has to be a genuine commitment from the top down where the organization's vision and values are aligned with responsibility.
So it can't just be like a PR stunt. It has to be embedded in the company culture.
Right. It has to be authentic.
Okay, what's step 2?
Step 2 is stakeholder dialogue.
So talking to the people who are affected by the company's actions.
Yeah, it's about actively engaging with employees, suppliers, customers, the community to understand their expectations and concerns.
So it's more than just like sending out surveys. It's about having real conversations. Okay, makes sense. What's next?
Step 3 is where the rubber meets the road. It's about developing integrated initiatives.
Okay, so translating those stakeholder expectations into concrete actions.
Precisely, it's about developing specific policies and actions that are directly tied to the organization's strategic goals.
So it's not just about having a separate corporate social responsibility department. It's about integrating responsibility into every aspect of the business.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture with step 4.
Step 4 is internal awareness, making sure that employees at all levels understand the what and why of strategic responsibility management.
So everyone needs to be on the same page.
Yeah, you can have the best initiatives in the world, but if your employees don't understand them or buy into them, they're not going to be very effective.
Right, it's about getting everyone on board.
Exactly. And step 5 is about institutionalizing change-making responsibility, part of the performance management system.
Oh, okay, so like measuring and rewarding responsible behaviors.
Precisely making it part of how employees are evaluated and rewarded.
So it's not just about good intentions, it's about actually incentivizing people to do the right thing.
Exactly. And finally, step 6 is all about reporting, communicating the organization's efforts both internally and externally.
So being transparent about what you're doing.
Right. It's about showing your stakeholders that you're serious about responsibility and that you're making progress.
Okay, those are some pretty comprehensive steps, but are there actually any companies out there that are doing all of this successfully?
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of companies that are doing great work in this area. Aguinis highlights 3 examples in his chapter that I think are really interesting.
Oh, okay, I'd love to hear about them.
So the first one is The Body Shop.
The Body Shop, oh yeah, I know them. They're all about like natural beauty products and ethical sourcing, right?
Right. They've been a leader in this space for a long time. They have a strong commitment to fair trade, human rights, animal welfare, and environmental protection.
So they're not just talking the talk, they're actually walking the walk.
Exactly. They've implemented a whole host of initiatives to back up their values. For example, they were the first cosmetics company to source sustainably harvested palm oil, and they use a high percentage of recycled materials in their packaging.
That's impressive. Okay, what about the other examples?
Another company Agranis mentions is the MGM Grand in Las Vegas.
The MGM Grand. Wow, that's a huge operation.
Yeah.
How do they approach responsibility?
Well, they faced a big challenge when they opened. They needed to hire thousands of employees in a very competitive market.
Yeah, Las Vegas. I can imagine it's tough to find qualified workers there.
Right, so they saw this as an opportunity to give back to the community.
Oh, that's cool.
They created the Employment Outreach Program, which reserved a significant number of job openings specifically for economically disadvantaged individuals.
So they were solving their own staffing needs while also creating opportunities for people who might not otherwise have them.
Exactly. It was a win-win situation.
I love that. Okay, so we've got a global beauty brand
Yeah.
and a massive casino resort. What's the third example?
The third example is Chiquita Brands International.
Chiquita the Banana Company.
Yeah, but they actually have a bit of a controversial history.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, for decades, they were actually known for being not so responsible.
Oh, wow. What kind of things were they doing?
Well, they faced accusations of labor exploitation, environmental damage, even political meddling.
Yikes. That's pretty bad.
It was a real PR nightmare for them.
So how did they turn things around?
Well, they realized they needed to make some serious changes, and they decided to embrace strategic responsibility management.
So they went all in on this framework we've been talking about.
They did. They started by creating a new vision statement that was centered around responsibility and establishing a set of core values that integrated social and environmental considerations.
Okay, so they were making some big promises, but did they actually follow through?
They did. They invested heavily in training their employees on these new standards, especially those working on their banana farms in Latin America.
Right.
And to prove their commitment to sustainability, they got all of their farms certified by the Rainforest Alliance.
Wow, that's a pretty big commitment.
It was, and it paid off. Their efforts led to improved economic performance, a significant reduction in workplace accidents, and a smaller environmental footprint.
So they really turned things around.
They did. They're a great example of how even companies with a less than stellar past can change course and become forces for good.
That's really inspiring. Okay, so it seems like this organizational responsibility thing is more than just a trend. It's something that's here to stay.
I think so, and I think we're only going to see it become more important in the years to come.
But I'm still curious about something. We started this whole conversation talking about how psychology, specifically IO psychology, has been relatively silent on this topic.
Right.
Why is that? And what role can IO psychology play in this evolving landscape of organizational responsibility?
That's a great question, and one that Aquinas explores in his chapter. It's a bit of a puzzle why IO psychology hasn't been more involved, but there are a few possible explanations.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. Like, why haven't we heard more from IO psychologists about this whole organizational responsibility thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. One possibility is that IO psychology has just traditionally focused on more individual level issues within
Okay,
organizations.
so like employee selection, training, motivation, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Those have always been kind of the core areas of focus for IO psychologists. But organizational responsibility is often about the organization as a whole and its impact on the wider world.
So it's almost like two different perspectives.
Right. And another factor might be the emphasis on internal versus external issues. IO psychology has typically focused on what's going on inside the organization, while organizational responsibility has a strong external focus, considering the impact on things like the environment and society at large.
It sounds like they're coming from different angles, but even with those historical differences, I feel like IO psychology could still have a lot to offer in this area.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's where things get really exciting because IO psychology has a lot of expertise that could be incredibly valuable to organizations that are trying to become more responsible.
Okay, so like what specifically?
Well, think about training programs, for example. IO psychologists are experts in designing and delivering effective training, right? So
Okay.
that expertise could be really useful in helping organizations roll out their responsibility initiatives. Remember those training programs that Chiquita implemented for their employees?
Yeah.
IO psychologists could help ensure that those programs actually lead to real behavioral change.
So it's not just about raising awareness, it's about actually changing how people act.
Exactly. And another area where IO psychology could contribute is in performance management.
Okay, how so?
Well, IO psychologists are really good at developing systems that measure and reward desired behaviors and outcomes. Think back to the MGM Grand's employment outreach program. That program was successful because they had clear metrics for tracking its impact, and they provided incentives for managers to actually hire from the target population.
So you're saying that IO psychologists could help design systems that actually incentivize people to behave responsibly.
Exactly. Make it part of their job to do the right thing.
I like that. And what about research? What role could IO psychology play in research on organizational responsibility?
Oh, tons of potential there. We could study things like the individual factors that influence responsible behavior. What kind of personality traits or attitudes make someone more likely to be a champion for these kinds of initiatives?
Interesting.
Or how different organizational cultures impact responsible behavior.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because the culture of an organization can really make or break these kinds of efforts.
It really can. So there's just so much we could explore, and I think IO psychology has a real opportunity to be a leader in this field.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
So for all of our listeners out there, what's the main takeaway from all of this?
The main takeaway is that organizational responsibility is not just some passing fad. It's about making conscious choices that benefit people, the planet, and the bottom line. And it's something that we can all be a part of.
I love that.
Mhm.
But how can our listeners actually make a difference in their own workplaces?
Well, think about your own workplace. What steps can you take to promote responsibility? Maybe you could suggest a recycling program or advocate for ethical sourcing practices or volunteer with a local charity. Even small actions can make a difference.
That's a great reminder that we all have the power to make a positive impact.
So
But to wrap things up, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and I hope it's inspired our listeners to think more critically about their own roles in creating a more responsible future.
it's been a pleasure. And for anyone who wants to learn more about this topic, we'll be sure to include some resources in the show notes. So until next time, keep learning and keep questioning.